Welcome to the Oasis. My name's Mike, and today, this video is going to be something completely different. Now, you've probably seen Draw My Life videos before on YouTube, but this is going to be a Paint My Life video, and it's going to be in VR180, which I don't think has ever been done before. This means that you can watch this video on your mobile phone or desktop, just like a normal video, but now you can look around the scene if you want to. Or for the best experience, you should check it out in VR using a VR headset and using the free YouTube VR app on Steam or Oculus Home. So this is kind of weird for me to share so much personal information about myself, and you'll probably understand why I say that when I share details of my upbringing and the choices that I made later on in life, but I think it's a good opportunity to open up more as an individual rather than just me being a creator on YouTube, and for me to document this so maybe in 20, 30 years time I can look back and have a record online of what I've done with my life. All the artwork in this video was created by the awesome VR artist The Sabby Life, who created it by hand in VR using Google's Tilt Brush, using real photos from my past for reference, and I've linked to her website in the description down below if you want to go check it out. So, my story starts like most of these stories. I came into the world kicking and screaming in June 1982, born in Germany. Now you're probably asking, why Germany? Well, my parents, who were quite young at 20 years old at the time, were living in Germany due to my dad being in the army. They had met each other at school, and my dad, like many young lads at the time, joined the army right after school at the age of 16. They got married at 18 and were posted to Germany, where my dad served in the artillery regiment and my mum worked as a hairdresser, and a couple of years later, that's when I came along. I always laugh when I see this picture of me as a baby. I look super chilled out and content with my ice cream that I'd somehow managed to get all over my face. When I was 4 years old, my younger brother David was born. Apparently, I wasn't so happy about this, and I was actually caught trying to smother him with a pillow shortly after he was born. Thankfully, though, he's never held this against me, and we grew up together playing video games and watching movies. Some of our favorite things to do growing up was to quote movies together like a little comedy double act. We used to love quoting movies like Wayne's World and Austin Powers, and we used to have our grandparents, uncles, and aunties in tears of laughter. This picture, it really looks like I was taking my brotherly duties very seriously, although David doesn't look very happy at all, bless him. Growing up in Germany, I have really fond memories of going on family camping trips to places like Bavaria. I'll always remember they had this huge lake which was so picturesque with crystal clear water and mountains in the distance. It really was incredible. Near where we stayed was the famous castle where the classic movie Chitty Chitty Bang Bang was filmed, which was amazing, although I have to be honest, I was pretty scared of the child catcher from the movie at the time. It's funny though, whenever I tell people I grew up in Germany, people always ask me, do I speak German? I don't, by the way. We lived in an area with other British kids and went to English schools, so the only German that we needed was how to order food and sweets. Ein Currywurst mit Pommes was pretty much all I needed to get by. It was when I was around 6 years old when I received a Commodore 64 for Christmas, and that was the real beginning of me being obsessed with computers and technology. The Commodore 64 was an 8-bit computer that played video games on cassette tapes, believe it or not. Or you could buy magazines and books and copy pages and pages of game codes to play a game. And it would work like 50% of the time. I would take that Commodore 64 everywhere with me, and after a while I could set it up by myself without any problems at all. Some of my all-time favorite games on that system were Ghostbusters, Bubble Bubble, Barbarian, and Bruce Lee. And although we stayed in Germany for a long time, we would typically move around every 3 years, so growing up I was constantly going to different schools, making new friends, and then 3 years later moving on again. Gaming was my rock and was always there for me and became a really important part of my life. As I grew up, I continued my obsession with computers and gaming and eventually upgraded to a much more modern Amiga 600. Some of my favorite games were Another World, Cannon Fodder, Syndicate, and Monkey Island. I was also obsessed with movies like RoboCop and Terminator 2 Judgment Day, and I even tried my best to look like the kid from the movie, as you can see in this picture. At 13, my dad was working in the medical corps and got posted to Northern Ireland. Our family was devastated as there was still a lot of trouble there at the time. We lived on this army estate, which was an hour's drive from Belfast, and armoured patrols would regularly drive through our estate as tensions in Northern Ireland were still high. I went to a mixed Catholic and Protestant middle school, and despite there being issues between the Catholic and Protestant kids, they despised the British being there even more. In my early teens in Northern Ireland growing up, it really wasn't easy. I got into a lot of fights at school, and mainly through no choice of my own. I ended up developing a really strong Northern Irish accent, and people quickly forgot I was an English kid, and I guess that was my coping mechanism and kind of way of blending in. I then slipped into a bad crowd, and I was constantly getting into trouble, skipping school, smoking and drinking, and just thankfully I quickly learned that just wasn't me, and I broke free of those bad habits. Again, gaming and movies were my savior and pretty much got me back on track. After 3 long years, we moved from Northern Ireland to England, and I was so happy to have a fresh start. That's the only good thing about moving around so much as a kid, because each move, you can reinvent yourself and start afresh. Things were looking up for me in England, and I found a great core group of friends. I attended school, and I was generally pretty well behaved. After having a short affair with consoles, I was back to PC gaming again, and now I had access to the internet for the first time. I had an AOL dial-up connection, so a single image would take like a minute to load, and the concept of streaming or YouTube just didn't even exist at the time. And it was around about this time in my life that I got my first taste of virtual reality. It was at London's Trocadero, where they had a virtuality machine. It was super basic, but I loved the idea of being in the game world. And it reminded me of that classic TV show in the UK called Nightmare, where you're actually in the game. It was also around this time that movies like Lawnmower Man were exploring the idea of virtual reality, and I was completely fascinated by the concept of it. After leaving school at 16, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, other than I knew I wanted to work with computers. I went to college to study computer science, but struggled as my tutor was actually smoking more weed than the students were, and I quickly got very bored and frustrated. I quit college and had a few jobs here and there, doing telesales. I was a Hoover salesman and a rep for a kitchen worktop manufacturer, none of which I was particularly inspired by. My best friend at the time had recently joined the police service and invited me on a holiday with a few of his colleagues. And during that holiday, I discovered that police officers were just normal people, just wanting to help others, and you didn't need to be a superhuman to make a difference. And after that holiday, I signed up and joined the police service. I started off like most in the police service, in uniform, responding to emergency calls, and moved on to various departments during my 13 years in the force. I worked on drugs teams, search and riot teams. I even did a small stint on a murder investigation team, but I eventually found my calling in a technical role, which I absolutely loved. The early years of driving around from call to call were definitely the most fun and exciting though. It was a great job at heart, but I hated the politics involved. Some of the people I met during this time are still my best friends, and I miss working with them every day. During this time, I met my now wife, Kate. We met through a girl who I actually went through police training with. Kate is super down to earth and so much fun. She's a Harry Potter super fan, and she just totally gets me. When Kate qualified to become a solicitor, people used to call us Law and Order because I was in the force and she was a solicitor. Kate and I had no plans on having children when we met, but we had our dog, Digby, a black and white Cocker Spaniel. We loved him to bits, but sadly he passed away a year ago. This was probably the hardest time in my recent years, but it brought Kate and I closer together, so for that, I'm grateful. We're planning to get another dog sometime in the near future, as nothing beats having a dog around the house. It was around this time that I got into building my own computers. I almost enjoyed building them as much as I did playing on them. It's like the ultimate Lego for adults, in my opinion. I still recall seeing the original Oculus DK1 Kickstarter campaign and just being giddy with excitement. I couldn't afford it at the time, but began saving like immediately. 2 years later, when the Oculus DK1 kit started shipping out to backers, I had saved enough money and ended up paying well over the odds for a kit from eBay. I remember being so excited to try it out for the first time. No one back then knew or cared about comfort options, so pretty much everything you tried on the DK1 was going to make you feel sick. I remember playing a mod of Half-Life 2, and after like 20 minutes, I felt so motion sick I had to lay down for 4 hours with ginger ale to recover. That didn't put me off though, and I knew right there and then the VR was going to be the future of gaming. 2 years later, the Oculus CV1 launched, and I had pre-ordered it straight away. They originally shipped with a single sensor for tracking and an Xbox One controller. I enjoyed games like Lucky's Tale, but there was a real lack of content. A year later, when the Oculus Touch controllers launched, I was completely blown away. I thought VR was incredible again, and having two fully tracked controllers made such a huge difference. The problem was, no one around me still cared about VR, or really saw its potential like I did. I was using VR more and more, and especially when I'd had a rough day at work. It was the ultimate way to escape the real world, from which I had seen through work could be, at times, a dark and horrible place. And just like before, gaming and technology became my rock and coping mechanism. After some encouragement from a good friend, I started uploading VR gameplay videos and guides on YouTube, and soon gained a small following. I started to talk to and collaborate with creators I'd watched myself, like Nathy, and ended up hosting a weekly VR podcast, which would eventually become what it is now, the F Reality Podcast. After uploading for around 18 months in my spare time, I'd amassed around 12,000 subscribers. I was earning some money through the channel and just decided to quit my job and go full-time on YouTube. It was one of those things that I just felt like I had to try it, and if it failed, I could always go back to the police service, but if I didn't try it, I would always regret it. So I saved enough money as a backup plan, and Kate was really supportive. And that kind of leads me up nicely to where we are today, almost 2 years later, and here I am, still creating VR content on YouTube, recently surpassing 150,000 subscribers, and having the opportunity to do projects like this in VR180 and experiment with something new and exciting. I'm much happier today than I've probably ever been in my adult life, and I'll always be super grateful for having this opportunity, and I couldn't have done it without the support of you watching, liking, and subscribing to the channel. I have no idea what's going to happen in the future with VR or even my future on YouTube, but I hope you stick around and join me on this journey together, and maybe I can do a recap in another 5 years and see how far we've come then. So, I hope you've kind of enjoyed this short recap of my life so far. Let me know in the comments if you've shared any similar passions growing up, or you can relate to moving around or having a tough time as a kid. I'd love to know in the comments down below. Thanks again to The Sabby Life for the amazing artwork created in Tiltbrush for this video, and I hope you've enjoyed this as something a bit different on the channel, and you've enjoyed the opportunity to learn more about me as an individual. Take care, and as always, I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.